Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Bill McKibben. Thank you for joining us.
What a pleasure to be with you.
Well, welcome to beautiful New Mexico, and I think we're a state that sort of, unfortunately, is manifesting a lot of what you've learned in your studies as a very famous environmentalist, as an activist. You founded a group called 350.org. The Boston Globe in 2010 called you the nation's leading environmentalist. Time magazine has called you the world's best green journalist. You've gotten more degrees than we can count. You're on everybody's list of most influential thinkers, most important, Guggenheim Fellow, Lannan Literary Award, plus you've written a lot of books. So we're quickly going to go through them. You wrote the first book about global warming. Tell us about that.
It's a book called The End of Nature, all the way back in 1989. And the sad truth is, the science came true. I've spent 22 years hoping to be proved wrong, and no such luck.
After that, years later, you've had several books in between. You published Fight Global Warming Now, which was a guide.
This is as we've begun to do more of this large-scale activism around the world, we needed a way to help people understand how to start organizing in their communities. So we put what we knew into that book.
And then just last year, you came out with Earth, Eaarth.
You have to kind of channel your sort of inner Schwarzenegger a little, to sort of
okay.
Earth.
Yeah. Well, okay, and then you might as well channel your inner Schwarzenegger for the subtitle.
Well, no, that's pretty much straight ahead. Making a life on a tough new planet. The conceit of the book, of course, is that we've already changed this planet enough that it needs a slightly different name, hence the extra A in Earth.
Well, you have been on Charlie Rose, David Letterman, Colbert. You do all these things, and it's very important. This is what I ask of you today. If for our audience, you could give the basic premise of your work that you put forth in Earth.
Sure. Look, when I wrote the first book about climate change 20 years ago, we actually knew most of what we needed to know. You burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon in the atmosphere. The molecular structure of that CO2 traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. The planet warms. The only thing we didn't know 20 years ago was how fast and how hard it was going to pinch. The story of those 2 decades is it's pinching harder and faster than we expected. So Earth is the kind of account of what we've seen so far. If you go and scoop a sample of seawater out of the ocean, wherever you are, it's about 30% more acid than it was 40 years ago. Its chemistry is changing as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. If you take a satellite picture of the Earth in summer, northern hemisphere summer, there's about 40% less ice in the Arctic than there was when Apollo 8 took those beautiful pictures. If you study the atmosphere of the planet, you'll find that since warm air holds more water vapor than cold, it's about 4% wetter than it was 40 years ago. That's a big change, and what it means is that in arid areas like this, we're seeing more drought, and in wet areas, where I live, say, on the East Coast, we're seeing far more drought, far more deluge and downpour and flood. So name a system on the planet, and it's now in flux, Lorene, and all of this is dangerous, and all of it's expensive. You don't even have to believe scientists if you don't want to. Just ask insurance companies, the people we ask in our economy to analyze risk, and they're very clear. The world's biggest insurance company said, Munich Reinsurance, said last December, no way to understand what's going on with this increase in disasters except for the rapid onset of human-caused climate change.
Well, for the science, because I encourage people. I want this show to be just a springboard for people who haven't really thought about it to start doing their own research. First of all, by reading Earth, and I want to mention your friend James Hansen, he has a book called Storms of My Grandchildren, The Truth About the Coming Climate Catastrophe and Our Last Chance to Save Humanity. But he is one of our leading climatologists. He works with NASA. And years ago, he started with these Arctic ice core readings, and then it came forth, I think you call it once the most important scientific paper that's ever been delivered.
That's right. In January of 2008, certainly the most important of this millennia anyway, he and his team at NASA published a paper saying, we know enough about carbon in the atmosphere to know how much is too much. They said any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. Now that's very strong language for a scientist to use, and of course it's stronger still when you know that wherever you are on Earth today, whether you're in Santa Fe or Santiago or any place, the atmosphere is about 393 parts per million CO2 and increasing about 2 parts per million per year. We're already way too high. That's why, Texas is burning up and Vermont, where I'm from, is flooding and so on and so forth. Things are already out of balance, but that balance will get even more desperate unless we get off coal and gas and oil sooner rather than later.
Well, let's go with 350, because you started a group called 350.org. So give us some of the numbers, because the numbers are really revealing. 350 is the parts per million of CO2 in our atmosphere.
That's right.
But you tell us.
Well, that's right. 350 is how much we can safely have. So the effort to start this first big global climate campaign was an effort to get people to understand that this is not some abstract future risk, but a very present crisis. And it was an effort to do it around the world. The reason we chose this slightly wonky scientific data point to organize around is because Arabic numerals mean the same thing no matter where you are. And so we've been able to organize, well, CNN said it was the most widespread political actions in the planet's history. I think we've organized about 15,000 rallies and demonstrations in every country on Earth except North Korea over the last 3 years. And it's begun to make some difference. There's a lot of places now where climate change is a much more salient issue. In fact, one of the things I can say, having traveled around the world spewing carbon behind me in this work, is that the U.S. is unique in its unwillingness to grapple with this issue. The U.S. and Canada really are the last places on Earth that just are have a fair number of these climate-denying people and not acting at all. Even places like China are doing fairly remarkable things. China, though it's opening a lot of coal-fired power plants, is also leading the world in renewable energy development. 250 million Chinese, when they take a shower at night, the hot water is coming off solar hot water panels on the roof. That's about a quarter of China. In this country, that number is well under 1%, even though virtually everyone in a state like New Mexico could get all the hot water they'd ever need off their roof.
I have solar hot water.
There you go. You know the story then. And the payback time is very, very short. These things make enormous economic sense. We're just not doing it because we haven't developed the political will. The power of the fossil fuel industry is so strong here that it's kept us from making the kind of changes that we need. And so we need to build these movements to stand up to that fossil fuel industry.
But from reading your book, I understand now the siren song of oil, because you point out that 1 barrel of oil represents 250,000 hours of human labor. So there's a decade of human labor in each barrel of oil. And the average American uses 25 barrels of oil a year. That's like getting 300 free years of human labor annually. Who could turn that down?
Fossil fuel is pretty magical stuff. Easy to get at, rich in BTUs, easy to transport. It's too bad that it's destroying the planet, because we're not going to have anything quite its equal. What comes next is different. Sun and wind will produce power everywhere and already are, probably not in the same quantities that we can just afford to waste it in the ways that we do now, but happily in enough volume that we should be able to lead decent, dignified lives. I think the logic of those lives will be a little different. Sun and wind, because they're everywhere, but everywhere diffuse, argue for more localized economies, I think, instead of the huge globe-spanning ones we have at the moment. But that will be all right. Much of my work in recent years has been about the fact that our kind of high consumer society that we've built actually isn't making us particularly happy, and that a turn towards a more community-oriented economy might be a good thing. For example, New Mexico, like Vermont's one of the places where this local food movement has really taken off. And that's good for ecological reasons, and it's good for culinary reasons, but it's most of all good for social reasons. If you go to the farmer's market, you have on average 10 times more conversations per visit than you do at the supermarket. That's one of the reasons we like them. And so this slightly more localized world that I think we're headed towards will not exactly resemble the world that we know now, and it'll be difficult getting there, and there'll be some real adjustments. But life on the other side of fossil fuel will be okay, too.
Well, your friend Dr. Hansen terms it as sort of a Faustian bargain that humanity made. So how do you get out of a deal with the devil?
Well, you've got to learn. You've got to learn how to say no. And we have a kind of valuable ally in that, in the fact that we're running out of easy energy to get at. The really easy oil, the kind where you just stick a drill bit in the ground and up it comes, that's gone. And we should take that sort of advent of peak oil as a clue to make this transition gracefully onto renewable energy. Instead, at the moment, we're taking it as a cue, and the high price that comes with it, to go rampaging around the world finding what you might call extreme energy, stuff that's hard to get at. It's a mile and a half below the surface of the ocean. It's in these vast tar sands complexes in Canada. It's underneath mountains that you have to remove, do mountaintop removal coal mining. It's in gas deposits that need to be fractured in order to get at them. And if we go and do all these things, not only will we wreak great havoc in the places where we're doing them, but we'll also probably find enough hydrocarbons, enough coal and gas and oil to take us way past any climatic tipping points. We're not dealing gracefully with this transition. We're just trying to postpone it as long as we can. And every chemist and physicist would tell us that's a grave mistake.
Well, even on the cover of your book, you have a quote from Barbara Kinsolver saying, take this book, read it cover to cover. There's nothing you are doing that could be more important than reading this right now. There's an urgency about this.
Well, nothing more important than acting, I think, getting out and getting involved. We just did this big demonstration at the White House this week, and there was Barbara Kingsolver right on hand helping out. Barbara Kingsolver and Terry Tempest Williams and David Abram, your New Mexico writer, and all kinds of other important thinkers
But
on hand.
Canadians who come to tell us, people like Naomi Klein, who wrote Shock Doctrine, my personal goddess, Maud Barlow, who wrote Blue Gold about water. And, the Canadians come here to tell us, saying it's not all that. We're
Absolutely.
worried about it, too.
Maud and Naomi were both on hand for this great demonstration when we circled the White House 3 and 4 deep in people on Sunday, trying to stop this pipeline from Canada down, bringing this tar sands oil. They are great heroes. I completely agree.
So there were 12,000 people there.
Yes.
It was a totally peaceful, nonviolent demonstration. Someone had this kind of float that was like a long snake, like the
pipeline, yes.
Yeah, and one of the other things I liked, there was a big banner that said "Occupy Earth."
That's right. It's been an interesting year, hasn't it? Started in Tahrir Square and continued on around the Arab world, and then we did the first part of this pipeline protest was a large, very peaceful civil disobedience action in Washington over 2 weeks at the end of the summer that sent 1,200 or so of us to jail and really made it an issue. A few weeks after that, the Occupy movement breaks out across the country. That's been quite interesting and powerful to watch.
But in August, didn't you have over 1,200 people, including yourself,
Yes.
arrested?
Yes.
And wasn't that one of the largest?
It was the largest civil disobedience action in about 35 years in this country.
And if you don't mind my getting personal, you mentioned at a lecture I heard you give that your wife had handed you a note that said, "You spent more nights in jail than you have at home."
Yeah, unfortunately, she emailed me the note, so I didn't even get to see her
Oh.
hand it to me.
Oh.
It's been a long fall. This pipeline fight has been very big and pitched battle, and it's not at all clear how it's going to come out or anything else. But we've taken something that was almost a certainty, where the odds were 100 to 1 that it would be approved, and we've changed those odds significantly over the last couple of months. And that's been exciting to watch because it's been the result of people just standing up, and it's a good indication that we'll need to stand up like that on a lot of things in the future.
Well, I think one of the things that caught people's attention was Dr. Hansen had said that if this, well, you tell us.
Said that if these tar sands in Canada are heavily developed, it's, as he put it, essentially game over for the climate.
Well, that's chilling.
It is. If you could burn all that oil in Canada at once, the deposit is so large that you would increase the atmospheric concentration of CO2 from its current 393 to about 550 parts per million. That's, you know, if that's not hell, it's of a similar temperature, you know, that kind of world.
Well, I would like to go back to the science a little bit with
Yes.
some numbers.
Yes.
So your organization is 350.org, and they can actually go to 350.org on the internet, and then you have a website, BillMcKibben.com.
Yes, 350.org is the place to go.
Yeah.
It's really, BillMcKibben.com just has books, you know, like, you know, how to buy my books or whatever. But the important stuff is the activist stuff, and that's there at 350.org. And one of the things that's beautiful there are probably in our Flickr account 30,000 pictures from around the world of all. One of the things they make clear is that old canard that environmentalism is something for rich white people who've taken care of their other problems is simply not true. Most of the people we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is made up of.
Yeah.
And they are the leaders in this fight, just as on this pipeline fight, the leaders have been people in indigenous communities on both sides of the border.
So back to the numbers. For 10,000 years, there was a stable percentage of CO2.
That's right.
Tell us.
The period that scientists describe as the Holocene, the 10,000-year period that underwrote the rise of human civilization, the geological era that you and I were both born in, and the geological era that's come to an end in the last 10, 20, 30 years, where we've crossed this line into a world that suddenly is heating up, destabilizing, starting to look very unlike that 10,000-year period.
So what was the percent then?
About 275 parts per million.
Okay, 275 parts per million for 10,000 years.
That's right.
Okay. Suddenly,
We start burning coal and gas and oil, and the number begins to go up, and at a certain point it gets dangerously high. What Hansen's team said was that point is 350 or below. 350 is the absolute maximum safe amount.
but we've already passed that.
We have. That's why we're having trouble. That's why Texas and parts of New Mexico have seen some of the, maybe in Texas, the worst drought ever recorded. That's why Texas just came through the hottest summer ever recorded by any state at any year in American history. You know, that's why we're seeing all this huge realm of effects around the world. It's bad already, and it will get very much worse if we keep going. So far, we've raised the temperature of the Earth 1 degree. But the climatologists are clear that if we keep burning coal and gas and oil, that 1 degree will be 5 or 6 degrees before the century is out. And there's just no coping with that kind of change.
Well, I know that Hansen has some proposals for, but I feel it's I hate to use this image. It is perfect about turning an oil tanker. Our culture is moving, civilization is moving in this direction, and even if we stopped immediately, the momentum.
Damage will be done. The question is how much, and whether we can back off in time that the Earth's resilient natural systems will still have some ability to kind of help us recover. Your analogy is the right one. At the moment, we're driving head on over the cliff, and instead of even slowing down or tapping on the brakes, we're pounding on the accelerator. 2 weeks ago, we found out that last year the amount of carbon in the atmosphere had increased the most in history.
6%, and
That's
that's from
right.
the Department of Energy.
That's right.
That's not from some wingnut group. That is
Right.
our government.
That's right. No, I mean, look, the science on this is not hard, and it's not obscure or mystical. You can count how much carbon there is in the atmosphere.
You had talked about what to do. There's mitigation versus adaptation. You have this wonderful line that we have to adapt to that which we cannot prevent, but prevent that which is unadaptable.
Exactly right. We've already raised the temperature. It's already causing trouble. We're going to have to do something about that in order to survive and thrive. But if we let it get too much further out of hand, we'll have change we can't adapt to. At 4 or 5 or 6 degrees temperature increase, all the climate mapping and stuff shows this part of the world just, people can't live in numbers. There won't be enough, water will evaporate too fast. It will be too hot. And that would be an enormous shame. This is one of the most beautiful parts of the entire planet. And we owe it to everyone, including ourselves, to try and keep it that way, especially since we can, especially since we now know most of the changes we need to make. We have the technologies that could replace fossil fuel. We just need to get to work in using them.
I'm going to ask you a very hard, very basic question. Would it be accurate to say that the adults alive now, that in the next 10 years, they'll decide whether we survive as a species? Is that too?
Oh, I imagine we'll survive as a species. We're very adaptable. But the question is more like, how's our civilization going to do? There'll be some human beings left someplace. They'll just be unhappy.
And hot.
That's right. And having a hard time.
One of the things you get frequently asked, where can we move to avoid all this?
There's really
It's one planet.
There's really no place to move, The place to move is the place with the strongest community, because those are the places that deal best with trouble, okay? And, that's why I suppose I'm happy to be in Vermont. It's a place of strong communities, the most rural state in the nation. But we have a strong tradition of town meeting, of, self-governance, of knowing each other. And so I think it'll do pretty well. I'd be more worried if I was in a kind of anonymous suburb someplace. I think that'll be harder.
Well, I have to say New Mexico has a very strong history of, of community and of
Absolutely.
working together.
My friend Stanley Crawford, the great New Mexico writer who wrote the wonderful book Mayor Domo about the sequoia network throughout here, that's one of the great examples of just this kind of cooperation, and one that will come in very handy in a water-short world.
So when we talk about where can we move, we can actually get moving as individuals to become more active and participate in groups like 350.org. And what else? Reading the books and
Look,
why are people so afraid of this?
oh, well, it's no fun. Look, it's scary to think about, and if one could, by denying it, make it go away, that would be a good thing to do. Denying rarely accomplishes that, in my experience.
Yeah.
And so it might be better to grapple with it head on, and in the happy knowledge that there were a lot of other people grappling with it too. One of the best things that happened last year for the whole movement was when people in Santa Fe did this amazingly beautiful, like flash flood image, thousands of them, when they managed to transform a dry gulch into a river. with blue cloth and cardboard, you know. And it's an image we've shown around the world, an image of great hope and power. The people at the Santa Fe Art Institute really did a remarkable job with that, and people from around the community. And really, that's why I wanted to come to Santa Fe, was to say thanks to people for that real brilliant effort.
And I live in the old village of Agua Fria. It was a 15-minute walk from my house, but there's another little community based around water, named after water. And so I just really want to thank you for coming. I want to urge people to read your books. This one is called, say it,
Earth.
Earth. Also, Fight Global Warming Now. And although you didn't write this, I think you would recommend it for people.
Oh, absolutely.
who
Storms
want
of my
to-
grandchildren.
yeah.
Jim Henson is a great, great national hero.
Yeah. And do you have a last final thought for us?
Only that it's going to be an interesting century, and we better start getting to work right now to make sure it's not just interesting, you know, not impossible.
Yes. I know that when you recently did a show with David Letterman, he held up your book and he said, well, thanks for scaring the heck out of me. And so I don't want people to be scared, but I want them to take a realistic look.
Realism is the thing, and as we get going, there are plenty of people around to be your allies in this fight. That's the good news from things like 350.org.
And what about the people who say human activity has had nothing to do with this? The real basic deniers.
Well, if their denial is rooted, as it usually is, in a kind of ideology, it's very hard to fight. They're not, you know, the scientific community has long since figured this out, and at this point, all you need is eyes in your head to see it, the sort of changes going on. But as I say, if all those things don't add up, just go ask the insurance industry.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the guys who are supposed to be reporting on risk for us.
Yeah.
They're very clear in what's happening.
And what this is, there have been 14 hugely expensive.
We've had $14 billion weather disasters in this country this year, which is
This year.
by August it had already set a new record. So, yeah, we're and I mean, it's just remarkable to see how fast this change is coming.
Yeah. Well, it's remarkable to have you as a guest on Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org and author of Earth, an incredible book to read. Thank you for joining us.
Lorene, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.